What if everything you think you know about reality, I mean, the very fabric of existence, is actually, well, upside down?
Upside down how?
Like, what if consciousness isn't just some fleeting byproduct of your brain chemistry, a kind of biological accident?
Okay, go on.
What if it's actually the fundamental ground, the stuff from which reality itself emerges?
So flipping the script entirely. Matter for mind, not mind for matter.
Exactly. And that's not just a philosophical what if. It's the really mind-bending premise we're diving into today. Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take your sources, your notes, all that research, and we really try to cut through the noise.
Yeah, we dig in to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights.
Our mission here is always to help you get well-informed, fast. We look for those surprising facts, maybe add just enough humor to keep you hooked along the way.
Keeps us hooked too, sometimes.
Today, we're embarking on a truly radical deep dive. We're looking at an article called The Conscious Universe, a synthesis of physics, neuroscience, and philosophy, arguing for the primacy of mind.
That title doesn't pull any punches.
Not at all. This isn't just a thought experiment. This piece, it doesn't simply challenge our most fundamental assumptions about reality. It proposes a complete, audacious inversion of how we understand existence.
Right. It's a bold, unified thesis that's really trying to bridge these huge chasms between, say, science and spirit, or physics and philosophy. And that's precisely our mission today. To unpack this thesis, we need to explore how it confronts one of the most stubborn problems in science and philosophy, what's known as the hard problem of consciousness.
The big one.
The big one. And we'll see how this article does it by synthesizing insights from fields that, at first glance seem utterly disparate, like cutting-edge modern physics, some really surprising findings from evolutionary cognitive science, and these incredibly ancient philosophical traditions that have pondered these exact questions for millennia.
Wow. So pulling from everywhere.
Pretty much. By the end, you'll discover how this synthesis offers a compelling, maybe even unified, vision of reality, where consciousness isn't just some byproduct, it's the primary fundamental force.
So, okay, what does this all mean for how we perceive our world? For the role of observation in maybe shaping what's real? And perhaps even, I don't know, the very purpose of existence. Let's unpack this.
Right. We've made incredible strides in understanding the human brain. I mean, we can map its neural networks, we can watch how it processes information, track how it helps us focus.
Yeah, fMRI scans lighting up different regions.
Exactly. We can even pinpoint areas that activate when we feel certain emotions. But there's this persistent, almost philosophical hurdle that neuroscience just keeps bumping up against. It was famously articulated by the philosopher David Chalmers, and it's known as the hard problem of consciousness. So what exactly is this hard problem? And why is it so stubbornly difficult to solve within our usual scientific framework? You've hit on it. It's crucial to distinguish it from what Chalmers called the easy problems. Now, easy is relative. They're still incredibly complex.
Sure, like how we process vision or language.
Exactly. Those are problems about function. How do we integrate sensory information? How do we pay attention? How does our brain process language? Or how do we report our own mental states? Neuroscience and psychology are making real progress there. We're figuring out the mechanisms.
Okay.
But the hard problem asks something fundamentally different. It asks why. Why are these cognitive functions accompanied by subjective experience? What philosophers sometimes call qualia.
Qualia, like the redness of red.
Precisely. Why does seeing the color red feel like something distinct and unique? Why does the pang of sorrow have that particular undeniable quality? It's about the what it's like of experience, that inner qualitative aspect that standard neuroscience, despite all its impressive advances in mapping the brain's wiring and firing, simply cannot touch. It can't explain the feeling.
Okay, so it's not just a gap in our current knowledge, like, oh, we just need more data or maybe better brain scanners in the future. It sounds like you're saying it's a fundamental conceptual barrier.
Precisely. That's the argument. The dominant scientific paradigm, which we often call physicalism or materialism, basically posits that reality is fundamentally composed of physical stuff.
Matter and energy.
Right. Things that can be exhaustively described by their quantitative properties. Their mass, charge, spin, momentum, their geometric configuration, position, and space-time. It's all numbers and math, ultimately.
Quantifiable stuff.
Yes. But subjective experience seems irreducibly qualitative. Think about it. There's no logical or deductive bridge you can build that leads you from a description of a complex set of neural firing patterns, which are just quantitative physical states, however complex, to the subjective quality of, say, tasting a strawberry.
You can describe the chemicals, the nerve signals, the brain regions.
But no amount of measuring electrical impulses or neurotransmitter levels in the brain explains why that specific physical state should feel like the particular sweetness and aroma of a strawberry and not, say, the feeling of dread or the sound of a trumpet or indeed like nothing at all. This is what's often called the explanatory gap.
It reminds me of that thought experiment, the philosophical zombies.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to highlight this gap, doesn't it? The idea of beings that are physically and functionally identical to us in every single way.
Walk like us, talk like us, process information like us.
But inside, nothing. Utterly lacking any inner subjective experience. Lights are on, nobody's home.
Exactly. And the mere fact that we can conceive of such zombies, even if they don't actually exist, suggests that explaining all the functions of the brain, the inputs, outputs, processing, isn't the same thing as explaining consciousness itself, the inner life.
So physicalism has a problem.
It leaves physicalism with a difficult choice. Either you deny consciousness really exists in the way we think it does, maybe call it an illusion generated by complexity, which feels profoundly counterintuitive.
Feels pretty real to me.
Right. Or you accept consciousness as some inexplicable brute fact that just accompanies certain physical states, leaving the correlation between brain states and qualia a permanent mystery, something science can maybe map but never truly explain.
Which isn't very satisfying scientifically.
Not at all. And this is why the article frames it so perfectly. The hard problem isn't necessarily a flaw in reality itself, but perhaps a feature of a flawed ontological assumption. It suggests maybe our fundamental starting point, our assumption about what's real, might just be off.
So, okay, the problem isn't necessarily with the universe, but maybe with the lens we're currently using to look at it. That's a pretty bold claim to make.
It is, and it's really the core argument of the source material we're exploring today. If matter, as we currently conceive it, this quantitative physical stuff cannot explain consciousness, well, then perhaps it's because matter isn't the fundamental building block of everything after all.
Okay.
Perhaps it's actually the other way around.
So the really radical proposal here is what the article calls an ontological inversion. Ontological meaning dealing with the nature of being of what exists. So what does inversion mean in practical terms for how we understand the universe around us?
It means turning the common assumption on its head. It means consciousness is the ontological primitive. It's the fundamental substrate of reality, the ground of being, the basic stuff from which everything else is made or arises.
Wow.
This inversion suggests that the physical universe, space-time, matter, energy, the laws that govern them, is not what generates mind. That's the standard view. Instead, the physical universe as we perceive it is a phenomenal projection, or maybe a structured representation, or even a limited observation that is generated from this more fundamental conscious ground.
So the physical world is like an output.
Exactly. It's a form of what philosophers call analytic idealism. It doesn't necessarily deny the existence of an external world, but it redefines its fundamental nature as being mental or experiential at its core. The physical world we interact with is real, but it's a manifestation of underlying consciousness.
Okay, so this sounds huge, obviously. But it's not just pure speculation, is it? Not just some abstract philosophical musing dreamt up in an ivory tower somewhere. The article states this thesis is built on a profound consilience of insights from various disciplines. What are these key pillars? What kind of scientific and philosophical heavy hitters are we talking about here?
Right, it's not just navel-gazing. The synthesis presented in the article really draws from some fascinating and often surprising areas, showing how these different lines of inquiry might actually be deeply structurally compatible. They point towards the same conclusion.
Okay, like what?
First, we have the work of Donald Hoffman. He's a cognitive psychologist, and his work in evolutionary cognitive science provides a rigorous mathematical and evolutionary rationale for why our perception of a physical world would likely be a non-veridical user interface, rather than a true window onto objective reality.
Non-veridical meaning, not truthful.
Not necessarily showing us reality as it actually is. Think about it from evolution's perspective. Sometimes efficiency and survival cues are way more important than perfect, objective accuracy.
So our senses are maybe more like a simplified app on a phone than a high-resolution camera showing every detail.
That's a great analogy, yeah. Second, there's Federico Faggin. He's a physicist, but he's also famous as the inventor of the first commercial microprocessor.
Wow, okay, the guy who literally built the first silicon brain?
Exactly. which makes his insights particularly compelling. He argues, drawing from principles of quantum mechanics and also computer science, that consciousness and the experience of meaning are irreducible. They're fundamentally quantum phenomena, and they cannot be simulated by classical computers.
Why not?
Because classical computation is just manipulating symbols according to rule syntax. It doesn't have inherent meaning or semantics. Fagan suggests consciousness is meaning, and it's a fundamental property of nature, not something that just pops out of complex symbol shuffling.
That's quite a statement, especially coming from someone with his background in computation.
It absolutely is, and it lends significant weight to the argument. Third, we have Sir Roger Penrose, the Nobel-winning mathematical physicist, working together with anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff.
Penrose and Hameroff, right? Or theory.
Exactly. Their OR theory, which stands for Orchestrated Objective Reduction, links consciousness to specific physical processes that they argue are non-computable. And crucially, these processes are rooted in the fundamental geometry of space-time itself, down at the quantum level.
So consciousness isn't just in the brain, but connected to the fabric of the cosmos.
That's the implication. It suggests that a basic foundational form of awareness, maybe call it proto-consciousness, is actually intrinsic to the very fabric of the universe. It's built in from the ground up. And finally, the article draws parallels with the Yogacara school, also known as Siddhamatra, from Mahayana Buddhism.
An ancient philosophical tradition.
Incredibly ancient and sophisticated. It developed this highly detailed mind-only ontology centuries ago, centered on the concept of a universal storehouse consciousness, the alaiva jnana, which acts as the generative ground for all perceived phenomena. It's astonishingly similar in structure to some modern ideas.
And there's an ambitious aim here, too, connecting this to Eric Weinstein's highly speculative but conceptually fascinating theory of geometric unity. How does GU fit into this grand picture?
Right. Geometric unity, or GU, is proposed in the article as a potential mathematical formalism for this entire consciousness-first ontology. Now, GU itself is still very much a work in progress as a unified theory of physics. It's not mainstream yet.
Highly speculative, as you said.
Very. But its core architectural principles are seen as deeply resonant with this consciousness-first idea. For example, GU doesn't start with our familiar four-dimensional spacetime. It starts with a much richer 14-dimensional mathematical object that Weinstein calls the observers.
14 dimensions, okay.
Yeah, and the article suggests our familiar 4D spacetime could be interpreted as a kind of projection, or what's called a pullback, an observation of this higher dimensional observers. So if consciousness is fundamental, maybe this 14D observers is the geometric correlate, the mathematical description of that conscious substrate.
And the pullback is how our perceived world emerges from it.
That's the potential link. The pullback mechanism in GU could be the mathematical description of the act of observation itself, the process by which our 4D reality is rendered from this deeper 14D structure. It's an attempt to find a language that integrates the observer and the observed into one unified geometric description.
Okay, that's where it gets truly mind-bending. Let's take a step back. The 20th century's quantum revolution. I think for most people, that's where things started getting really weird about reality.
Yeah.
Right? Especially undermining our common sense idea of an objective world just existing out there, independently of us, whether we look at it or not.
Absolutely.
The measurement problem, maybe best shown by the famous double-slit experiment, seems to fundamentally challenge that everyday realism. How so?
Yeah, quantum mechanics unveiled a profoundly strained reality, one where the observer seems inextricably linked to what is observed. Let's just quickly recap the double-slit experiment, because it's so fundamental.
Please do.
If you fire something small, like an electron one at a time, towards a barrier with two narrow slits in it, and you don't try to detect which slit each electron goes through, what happens on the detector screen behind the barrier?
You get an interference pattern,
Yeah.
like waves interfering.
Exactly. Even though you're sending particles one by one, they build up an interference pattern, as if each electron somehow went through both slits simultaneously, like a wave spreading out, and interfered with itself. It exists as a wave of possibilities.
But then everything changes the moment you try to find out which slit it went through.
Right.
If you put a detector at the slits.
Precisely. The instant you observe it, the moment you set up a detector to determine which slit the electron passes through, its wave-like nature vanishes. It collapses. It's forced to behave like a well-behaved, discrete particle. It goes through only one slit, definitively. And crucially, the interference pattern on the screen disappears. You just get two bands, like you'd expect from particles.
Like the electron knows it's being watched and decides to act normal.
It seems that way. It shows that physical properties, like which path did it take, aren't fixed attributes of an object just sitting out there waiting to be discovered. They remain indeterminate, existing only as potentials, until an interaction with an observing apparatus resolves that ambiguity. This inseparable link between the observer and the observed system, fundamentally, as the article puts it, fatally blue, what philosophers call naive realism, that comfortable, intuitive belief that the world is exactly as we perceive it, existing independently of our perception.
Okay, so enter physicist John Archibald Wheeler.
Mm-hmm.
He took these bizarre implications to an even more radical conclusion, didn't he? Proposing a participatory universe. What did he mean by that? And what's his famous, slightly cryptic phrase, it from bit?
Wheeler, definitely one of the giants of 20th century physics, worked closely with Einstein and Bohr. He argued that the universe isn't some pre-existing static machine that we just happen to inhabit and observe passively. Instead, he proposed it's brought into being through acts of observation. It requires participation.
Participation by observers.
Yes. His famous dictum, it from bit, really encapsulates this profound idea. He meant that every physical entity, every it, whether it's a fundamental particle, a field of force, maybe even the space-time continuum itself, derives its very existence, its reality, from bits. And by bits, he meant the answers to yes or no questions posed by an observer's measurement apparatus.
So a measurement is like asking the universe a question, is the electron here or there? And the answer, the bit of information, brings the electron's position, into concrete reality.
That's the essence of it. It's not just about what we know about reality changing, it's about existence itself being dependent on observation.
Wow. That's not just epistemology theory of knowledge, that's ontology theory of being. That's huge.
Yes, it's a direct ontological claim. Reality for Wheeler doesn't just have a physical origin, it has an immaterial source and explanation. It arises from these device-intermediated acts of posing a yes-no physical question and eliciting an answer. Think about the even stranger delayed choice experiment.
Where you decide how to measure after the particle should have already passed the choice point.
Exactly. And the results suggest that the choice of measurement now seems to influence whether the particle behaved like a wave or a particle in the past. It suggests observation can even retroactively define past reality. This led Wheeler to his participatory anthropic principle, where observers aren't just passive bystanders, they are necessary participants who, through their observations, literally make reality happen. It's as if the universe needs to be asked questions by observers to solidify from potentiality into actuality.
Wheeler's ideas immediately raise a huge question, though, one that still gets debated. What exactly counts as an observer? Does it have to be a conscious human, a cat, a Geiger counter, any physical interaction? This seems crucial. And Federico Faggin, the microprocessor pioneer we mentioned, offers a vital refinement here, doesn't he?
He really does. Faggin, coming from this deep background in both quantum physics and the foundations of computation, argues something critical. Consciousness is irreducible. It cannot be generated, nor can it be simulated, by any classical computational process, no matter how complex.
Why not? What's the barrier?
Because classical computation, at its heart, is pure syntax. It's just symbol manipulation, shuffling zeros and ones or any symbols according to a set of predefined rules. It lacks intrinsic meaning or semantics. You can program a computer to process the word love, but the computer doesn't feel love.
It doesn't have the subjective experience.
Exactly. For Faggin, consciousness is the direct experience of qualia, those subjective qualities, the redness of red, the warmth of the sun, and crucially, the experience of meaning. He posits these aren't just emergent properties that magically appear when computation gets complex enough. He argues they are fundamental properties of nature itself. They are the irreducible what it's like of existence.
Okay, so how does this connect back to quantum mechanics and Wheeler's it from bit? If computation can't be conscious, what can?
Faggin sees quantum phenomena as key precisely because they fundamentally defy classical description. Think about a quantum bit, a qubit. Unlike a classical bit, which is either 0 or 1, a qubit can exist in a superposition of both 0 and 1 simultaneously, and in fact, a continuous infinity of states in between. This richness, Faggin suggests, mirrors the continuous, flowing, and qualitative nature of our conscious experience, which isn't just digital on-off states.
Interesting parallel.
Furthermore, a specific quantum state is unique and, due to the no-cloning theorem, uncopyable. Just like your subjective first-person experience is private, unique to you, and cannot be perfectly replicated in another system. So Wheeler's bit, Fagan argues, isn't just some sterile binary digit extracted by any old measuring device. The collapse of the wave function, the moment the potential becomes actual, isn't just a random physical event. It's the actualization of potentiality into a moment of knowing or experiencing by a conscious entity.
So the observer has to be conscious.
That's Fagan's crucial point. The physical world, in his view, becomes a symbolic representation of a deeper, meaningful reality that is fundamentally conscious. The observer in Wheeler's participatory universe must, at some fundamental level, be a conscious agent, an entity capable of experiencing meaning and subjective qualia, the entity for whom the bit becomes meaningful information, an actual experience.
Okay, so if observation is fundamentally a conscious event, what's its physical correlate? What's actually happening down at the nuts and bolts physical level when this quantum weirdness resolves, when the wave function collapses? Roger Penrose, working with Stuart Hameroff, offers a specific mechanism with his theory of objective reduction, or OR, within their larger ORCH or R theory. How does that piece work?
Penrose was deeply dissatisfied with this standard Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, partly because it relies on this vague, ill-defined observer from outside the system, and partly because it seems to introduce a fundamental randomness into the universe that he felt shouldn't be there. He wanted a physical explanation for collapse.
Something objective, happening whether we look or not.
Exactly. He proposed that wave function collapse is not something triggered vaguely by measurement. It's a real physical process governed by a law of nature, one that arises from a conflict between quantum mechanics and Einstein's general relativity.
How so? Where's the conflict?
Well, general relativity teaches us that mass and energy curve spacetime. That's gravity. So Penrose considered, what happens if you have a quantum superposition of a mass? Imagine a tiny particle existing in two different locations simultaneously. According to GR, this isn't just the particle in two places, it's actually a superposition of two slightly different spacetime geometries. The very fabric of space and time around the particle is in a fuzzy, superimposed state.
Whoa! So it's not just the particle that's in superposition, but the actual geometry of space it occupies. That's a wild thought.
It is. And Penrose argues that this superposition of spacetime geometries creates an inherent instability. It's like having two different curvatures of spacetime trying to exist at the same time, creating a tiny blister or separation in the fabric of reality itself. He argues this state isn't sustainable. It contains a certain amount of gravitational self-energy related to how different the two geometries are.
And this instability resolves itself.
Yes. He proposed that this superposition will spontaneously collapse or reduce back to a single, definite classical state after a certain characteristic time. This is the objective reduction, or R. It's an objective physical process, meaning it happens automatically due to the inherent instability governed by physics, regardless of any external conscious observer or measuring device. It's built into the fundamental rules of the universe, arising from the interplay of quantum mechanics and gravity.
Okay, that explains collapse physically. But how does this connect to consciousness? That seems like a huge leap. And wasn't there something about Gödel's incompleteness theorems mixed in there too?
Right. This is where it gets really interesting and admittedly more speculative. The crucial part for consciousness, according to Penrose, is that the outcome of this objective reduction event, the specific state the system collapses into, isn't necessarily random, as standard quantum mechanics might assume.
Okay, so what determines the outcome?
Penrose draws on his earlier work related to Gödel's incompleteness theorems. These theorems fundamentally show that within any sufficiently complex formal system, like mathematics, there will always be true statements that cannot be proven within that system. Penrose argued this implies that human mathematical understanding possesses a quality of insight that cannot be reduced to mere algorithms or computation. He believes human understanding is fundamentally non-algorithmic.
Meaning it can't be replicated by a computer program no matter how sophisticated.
Exactly. So he controversially proposes that the specific choice of state made during an OR event, the outcome of the spacetime collapse, is influenced or selected by a non-computable factor. This factor, he speculates, is embedded within the fundamental Planck scale geometry of spacetime itself, the most basic, incredibly tiny level of reality where quantum gravity effects dominate.
And this fundamental level has proto-consciousness.
That's the bold proposal. He suggests this Planck scale geometry is endowed not just with mathematical truth, Platonic forms almost, but also with proto-conscious experience, a very basic fundamental form of awareness, like raw, undifferentiated feeling or potential awareness, not complex thought like ours. So each or event isn't just a physical collapse, it's a moment where a choice is made, influenced by this non-computable proto-conscious information embedded in the universe's structure. Each or event is a moment of proto-consciousness, a selection of space-time geometry that taps into this deeper, non-algorithmic Platonic realm. Penrose explicitly likens these discrete or events to Alfred North Whitehead's occasions of experience, which Whitehead saw as the fundamental experiential atoms of reality in his process philosophy.
Okay, let me try and stitch this together. So Wheeler sets the overarching logic. Observation creates reality. It from bit. Fagan then gives it meaning. The bit has to be understood or experienced by a conscious observer. It's about irreducible meaning. And Penrose offers the potential physics. This conscious observation event has a physical correlate in objective reduction, a non-computable self-collapse of space-time geometry that constitutes a moment of proto-consciousness itself, happening objectively within the universe. Is that roughly the picture?
You've synthesized it beautifully. That's exactly the line of argument presented. It takes the observer from being this vague, problematic concept tacked onto quantum physics and potentially elevates it to a central, physically grounded actor in the actual unfolding of reality. It suggests the universe isn't just passively observed, it comes into being through these discrete, potentially proto-conscious moments. It's not just what we observe that matters, but that observation, potentially rooted in consciousness, happens at all.
Okay, this leads to a really big question. If our reality is truly a product of observation, if it's so deeply intertwined with consciousness in this way, then why does it feel so incredibly physical, so solid, so structured, and so utterly independent of our will? I mean, I can't just wish this coffee cup into a donut, much as I might want to sometimes.
All right. The perceived solidity and reliability of the world is a major hurdle for any consciousness-first view.
And this is where Donald Hoffman's work on the interface theory of perception comes back in, right? Coming from evolutionary biology and cognitive science, he seems to offer a compelling answer. Maybe our perception isn't objective reality precisely because evolution didn't design it that way. It designed it as a user interface. How does he argue this?
That's exactly right, and it's where Hoffman's work provides a crucial piece of the puzzle, tackling that very objection head-on. The common assumption, held for centuries really, in cognitive science and even just common sense, has been that natural selection must favor veridical perceptions.
Veridical meaning truthful, accurate.
Exactly. The logic seems impeccable. An organism that sees the world as it actually is, that accurately perceives predators, prey, obstacles, mates, should surely have a fitness advantage over one that sees illusions or misinterprets reality. Therefore, we, as the incredibly successful descendants of countless generations of survivors, should trust that our senses provide us with a reasonably faithful picture of objective reality. It seems obvious.
Makes sense. Survival depends on knowing what's real.
But Hoffman and his collaborators have rigorously challenged this intuition, using mathematics and simulations. They demonstrate that the seemingly obvious logic is, as Hoffman starkly puts it, a fatal mistake. Their work shows, quite counterintuitively, that evolution by natural selection does not generally tune our senses to perceive objective truth. It tunes them to perceive fitness.
Fitness, meaning what helps us survive and reproduce, regardless of whether it's true. This is fascinating. He even developed a mathematical proof for this, didn't he? The fitness beats truth theorem, or FBT. Can you explain that in simple terms? What does the math actually show?
Absolutely. It's quite groundbreaking. Using the formal tools of evolutionary game theory and also computer simulations involving genetic algorithms, Hoffman's team modeled the competition between different perceptual strategies over many simulated generations. One type of strategy was a truth strategy, which tries its best to estimate the true, objective state of the world. The other type was a fitness strategy, which ignores objective truth entirely and is tuned only to the fitness payoffs associated with various actions in that world.
So not, what is that thing really, but can I eat it? Will it eat me? Can I mate with it? Stuff like that.
Precisely. The question's relevant to survival and reproduction. The results of both the mathematical proofs and the simulations were unequivocal and startling. A strategy that sees reality as it truly is almost never as fit, evolutionarily speaking, as a strategy that sees a simplified, fitness-salient version of reality. The FBT theorem demonstrates, in Hoffman's words, that the probability that natural selection has shaped our senses to see the truth is zero.
Zero. That's incredibly strong. Not just unlikely, but zero probability.
Zero. It's a shocking mathematical result. Of course, it depends on the technical definitions used in the theorem, but the core implication is robust. Evolution doesn't care about objective truth, it cares about adaptive behavior. Our minds literally evolved to help us survive and reproduce efficiently, not necessarily to provide us with a metaphysically accurate picture of the world.
So, as the cognitive scientist Steven Pinker noted, we evolved to solve life and death problems, not to commune with correctness. We're shortcut creatures, not truth creatures.
That's a perfect way to put it because shortcuts like instantly recognizing a pattern as dangerous snake without needing to analyze every scale or the exact physics of its slithering are far more efficient for survival and reproduction than painstakingly constructing a perfectly accurate model of reality in real time. Our senses are built for speed and utility, not comprehensive accuracy.
Okay, so what's the direct practical consequence of this FBT theorem for how we perceive the world around us right now, every day?
The direct consequence is what Hoffman calls the interface theory of perception, or ITP. ITP proposes that our entire perceived world, everything we see, hear, touch, taste, smell, functions, much like the graphical user interface, the GUI, on your computer desktop.
The icons, folders, trash can.
Exactly. Think about the icons on your screen, maybe a blue rectangular icon representing a text file. That icon is not a veridical, truthful representation of the actual reality inside the computer that it corresponds to, which is a complex mess of circuits, silicon, voltages, magnetic fields, millions of bits.
Right, the icon doesn't look anything like the actual file data or the hardware storing it.
Not at all. The icon's purpose is not to show you the truth of the machine's inner workings. Its purpose is to provide a simple functional interface that allows you, the user, to interact with the machine, effectively say, to write your document or delete the file without needing to understand or even be aware of the irrelevant underlying complexity. It hides the messy details and gives you useful controls.
So applying that analogy to us, physical objects like a tree or a car or this microphone, and even the space they seem to occupy and the time they persist through, they're just icons. Icons generated by our species-specific biological headset, our internal operating system.
Precisely. According to ITP, our entire perceived world is such an interface. Physical objects, the snake slithering across the path, the car hurtling towards us, the coffee cup in your hand, the space they appear to occupy, and the time in which they seem to move. None of these are objective reality itself. They are the icons of our species-specific perceptual headset. A perceived snake, for instance, is an icon that conveys a simple, urgent, fitness-relevant message. Danger, high-cost interaction, do not approach. It doesn't depict the true objective nature of whatever complex reality prompted that particular perception. Space-time itself, Hoffman argues, is not some pre-existing absolute container for reality. It is simply the desktop, the 3D or 4D, including time formatting system of our interface. We perceive a 3D world filled with persistent objects because that particular data format was evolutionarily advantageous for our primate ancestors to navigate their specific survival niche, guiding adaptive behavior. It's effective, it's useful, but it's not objectively true.
Okay, if space-time and physical objects are just a headset, just an interface, then what is the reality it obscures? If we're not seeing the truth, what's actually behind the icons? What's generating the interface?
Hoffman's answer to that is what he calls conscious realism. This theory posits that the objective world, the reality behind our interface, is not composed of unconscious particles and fields, the mind-independent physical stuff assumed by materialism. Instead, he proposes that the reality external to any specific observer is a vast, complex, social network of interacting conscious agents.
Conscious agents, like other minds or consciousnesses. A universe of interacting minds.
Something like that. Think of it perhaps metaphorically as a kind of cosmic social network, but the participants are fundamental units of consciousness, each with their own experiences and capacities to act and influence others.
And he's actually trying to build a rigorous mathematical model of these conscious agents, right? That sounds incredibly ambitious. How would that even work?
He is. It's extremely ambitious, but that's the goal, to move beyond metaphor. Hoffman and his collaborators are developing a precise mathematical model defining these conscious agents. They are modeled as entities possessing a space of possible conscious experiences, a set of possible actions they can take, and a decision-making process, often modeled probabilistically, perhaps like Markov chains initially, that selects actions based on experiences. Their dynamics are governed by mathematical relationships describing how these agents interact and influence each other's experiences.
Okay, and how do physical particles fit in?
In this framework, what we perceive through our interface as a stable physical particle, like an electron, is actually a simplified, low-dimensional projection of the incredibly complex, high-dimensional dynamics occurring within a system of interacting conscious agents. The theory aims to mathematically derive how space-time itself, along with quantum phenomena like superposition and entanglement and classical objects, emerge from the interactions within this fundamental network of conscious agents. Spacetime, in Hoffman's memorable phrase, is doomed as a fundamental concept. It's merely a data structure created by consciousness for consciousness to navigate its interactions.
Wow, okay, this directly addresses that huge objection we raised earlier. If the world is just mind or consciousness, why does it feel so solid, so stubbornly independent? Why isn't it just like a dream I can control with wishful thinking? Why can't I conjure that donut?
That's a critical point, and the FDT theorem and ITP provide the direct answer. Evolution itself demands that a useful interface must have these properties of perceived solidity and independence. Think about it. An interface that was flimsy or didn't represent fitness-critical information like dangers or resources with solid, dependable, persistent icons. Imagine if the icon for an oncoming train flickered in and out of existence, or if a cliff edge icon felt spongy, that would be a recipe for swift extinction.
Yeah, you wouldn't last long.
Exactly. Or an interface that could be easily altered by mere wishful thinking, I wish that predator wasn't there, would be equally disastrous. So the perceived solidity, the law-like regularity, the apparent causal closure, and the independence of the physical world from our individual desires are not evidence against an idealist or consciousness-first view. On the contrary, according to Hoffman, they are the predicted features of a successful evolutionary user interface, generated by a deeper conscious reality specifically designed to guide the behavior of its agents effectively and ensure their survival within a shared environment. It has to feel real and reliable for the game of life to work.
Okay, so if our physical world is, as Hoffman argues, an interface, then our best scientific theories, like the standard model of particle physics and Einstein's general relativity, they're brilliant descriptions, but they're descriptions of the rules of that interface, right? The programming, the desktop, not the fundamental reality of the computer itself.
That's the implication, yes. They describe the behavior of the icons and the structure of the desktop with incredible precision, but they don't necessarily tell us about the reality generating the interface.
So what would a true theory of everything, a TOE, look like in this paradigm?
Yeah.
It sounds like it would need a completely different kind of language, something that goes beyond describing the interface icons.
Exactly. A true TOE, in this view, would need to go deeper than just unifying the forces and particles within our 4D spacetime interface. It would need to be a theory of the underlying conscious substrate itself, Hoffman's network of conscious agents, or Fagin's one, or whatever it is, and, crucially, a theory of the projection mechanism that generates the interface from that substrate. This requires a new mathematical language, one that is not fundamentally predicated on assuming a pre-existing 4D spacetime as the starting point.
And this is where the article brings in Eric Weinstein's geometric unity again, proposing it as a candidate for this deeper language, a potential blueprint of the interface.
Right. Let's briefly revisit the core principles of geometric unity, as outlined in the source, particularly its architecture. What's the quick rundown again?
Okay, so GU is this incredibly ambitious attempt, still under development, to derive the fundamental features of our universe. The particles, the forces, the generations, maybe even the number of dimensions we observe purely from first principles of geometry and symmetry, rather than just plugging in experimental results.
Starting from math, not just observation.
Ideally, yes. Its core architecture involves several radical ideas. First, as we mentioned, it doesn't start with our familiar four-dimensional spacetime manifold, let's call it EXO. Instead, the fundamental arena is proposed to be a much richer 14-dimensional mathematical object called the observers, let's call it EO.
The 14-dimensional space. Roughly, you can think of it as our 4D spacetime, but with all the possible ways to measure distances and curvatures, the components of the metric tensor and its derivatives, attached as extra dimensions at every single point. It's a vastly complex space, encoding not just where things are, but all the potential ways space-time could be structured locally.
Okay, a much, much higher dimensional reality than the one we usually talk about in physics. What's the second principle?
Second, in this GU framework, our familiar 4D world XO is not fundamental. It's seen as an observation, or a slice of this 14D observers. The mathematical mechanism proposed for this observation is called the pullback. In standard physics, a mathematical object called the metric tensor just describes the gravitational field, the curvature of spacetime. In GU, this metric tensor, or related objects, is given a more active role. It acts like a sophisticated map or lens that pulls back information, specifically the values of fundamental fields that naturally live in the 14D observers, and displays that information onto our limited lower dimensional 4D slice EXO. What we perceive as fields and particles in our 4D world are these pullback values.
So our reality is like a shadow or projection from this higher dimensional observers.
Yeah.
And the third principle is that all the complicated physics we observe just emerges naturally from this geometry.
Yes, that's the most powerful and ambitious claim of GU. It posits that the fundamental ingredients of our universe, the specific particles of the standard model, like electrons, quarks, neutrinos, why they come in three distinct generations, the fundamental forces, electromagnetism, weak and strong nuclear forces, gravity, maybe even things like the Higgs mechanism, are not arbitrary inputs that we just discover through experiments and have to add to the theory by hand. Instead, they are claimed to emerge naturally and coherently from the pure mathematical geometry and symmetry structures of the 14-dimensional observerse itself. The laws of physics aren't imposed on the universe. They are supposed to be direct, inevitable consequences of this fundamental geometric structure. It's like finding the entire standard model hidden inside the geometry of this 14D space.
Okay, this is where the synthesis proposed in the article gets really exciting, potentially profound. How can we map these seemingly abstract geometric principles from geometric unity onto the consciousness first ontology we've been discussing? It feels like the pieces are starting to click together, maybe.
The architectural parallels identified in the source are indeed striking and profound. GU, if its structure holds up, could potentially be interpreted as providing the mathematical skeleton, the formal framework, for the metaphysical body of this consciousness-first thesis. The mapping suggested is quite direct and elegant.
Oh, so.
The 14-dimensional observer, this fundamental geometric arena of GU, is proposed as the geometric correlate for the fundamental ground of being the ultimate source of all reality. This single, unified, incredibly complex geometric object becomes the potential formalization, the mathematical description of many of the concepts we've discussed from different angles, such as Hoffman's network of conscious agents, which would involve incredibly complex, high-dimensional relational dynamics. It resonates with Fagin's concept of the one, the unified fundamental conscious field from which all differentiated reality emerges. It aligns beautifully with physicist David Bohm's idea of the implicate order, the enfolded, higher-dimensional, undivided wholeness underlying our perceived reality. And remarkably, it finds these ancient echoes in the Yogacara concept of Alaya Vijnana, the vast storehouse consciousness holding all potentials, and perhaps even in the Advaita Vedanta concept of Brahman, the singular, non-dual, timeless, spaceless reality. The observerse is the potential mathematical structure of that ultimate ground.
Okay, so the observer's is the fundamental conscious ground. In our familiar 4D spacetime, the world we actually experience every day.
That becomes the phenomenal interface. Our perceived four-dimensional spacetime, XOA, is identified with the projected phenomenal reality. It is Hoffman's user interface. It's Bohm's explicate order, the unfolded reality we perceive. It maps perfectly onto the Yogacara world of constructed appearances, the Parikalpita Sabhava. And it's the Vedantic world of Maya, the compelling, structured, but ultimately illusory appearance projected from Brahman. XO is the screen where the cosmic operating system displays its output for us.
And then the geometric mechanism of the pullback in GU, the process linking the 14D observers to our 4D world. That becomes the mathematical description of perception or observation itself.
Exactly. This geometric mechanism in GU, the pullback map, is interpreted as the mathematical formalization of the very act of observation or experience. It's the precise description of the process that renders the incredibly rich, higher dimensional information contained within the observers onto the limited, low-dimensional screen of our perceived spacetime. This provides a potential physical and mathematical description for Wheeler's it from bit. It's the mechanism that generates a phenomenal it, a perceived reality in XUR, from a noumenal bit, which is like a query or an interaction with the deeper reality of YOR. It's how the potential reality of the observers gets actualized into our specific experienced reality.
This implies a truly remarkable possibility that GU, even though it's still highly speculative as physics, could actually be the unified mathematical language that bridges physics, describing the interface and its projection, and metaphysics, describing the fundamental conscious ground. And it sounds like it might even resolve that old tension between different flavors of idealism, like is reality one universal mind or many individual minds?
Yes, precisely. The structure seems to allow for that unification. The observer's, UO, is a single, unified geometric object representing the one, the monistic ground, the ultimate reality. But its incredibly rich internal dynamics can be described by the interactions of its countless geometric components or degrees of freedom representing the many, the network of agents, the individual perspectives. Individual consciousness, then, could be understood as a localized pullback, a specific observation, a particular view or rendering of the unified whole from a particular vantage point within the network. This resonates powerfully with ideas from thinkers like Bernardo Kastrup, who models individual minds as dissociated alters, appearing within one universal underlying consciousness. GU potentially provides a geometric structure that naturally accommodates both the unity of the ground and multiplicity of experience, unifying monistic and pluralistic idealist perspectives into one coherent mathematical framework.
It's fascinating how this idea of consciousness being fundamental isn't some brand new 21st century invention prompted only by quantum physics. As you mentioned, it has incredibly deep roots in ancient philosophical traditions that predate modern science by millennia. Let's delve a bit deeper into the Yogacara school of Mahayana Buddhism. What was its core doctrine, and how closely does it really echo what we've been discussing with Hoffman, GU, and the others?
The Yogacara school, which flourished in India starting around the 3rd or 4th century CE, offers perhaps the most systematic, detailed, and psychologically sophisticated articulation of a consciousness-first ontology found anywhere in the ancient world. Its central doctrine is known as Vijnaptimatra, a Sanskrit term that translates powerfully and directly to consciousness only or perhaps representation only.
Consciousness only. That's unambiguous.
Pretty much. It posits that everything we experience, the entire external world we perceive with its objects, our own physical bodies, all events unfolding in time, is nothing but a projection, a modification, or a transformation of consciousness itself. It's not asserting that things don't exist at all, that would be nihilism, but rather that their fundamental mode of existence is purely mental, akin perhaps to the reality of a vivid, coherent dream.
And central to this whole system is this concept of alayavijnana, which gets translated as the storehouse consciousness. What exactly is stored in this storehouse? Is it like a cosmic hard drive?
That's a very apt analogy in modern terms. The eye of Vijnana is considered the deepest, most fundamental level of consciousness. It's conceived as an uninterrupted subliminal stream. It underlies even deep sleep. And this stream carries the seeds, or bisha in Sanskrit. These seeds are latent energetic imprints, like karmic potentialities, left by all past actions, karma, thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. They're also called vasanas, or habitual tendencies.
So everything we do or experience leaves a trace.
Exactly. This storehouse consciousness, with its accumulated seeds, is the basis for our personal continuity, why we feel like the same person from moment to moment, day to day, even across lifetimes in the Buddhist view. And crucially, the phenomenal world we perceive isn't regarded as an independent external reality that we passively observe. Instead, it's understood as the ripening or manifestation of these karmic seeds stored in the alaya. These seeds project outward, constructing the illusory appearance of a separate subject, the ego, the I, and a world of seemingly external objects, the not-I, the objective world.
Wow, that sounds incredibly similar to Hoffman's idea of the interface being generated by a deeper cognitive system based on past interactions and fitness payoffs.
The parallel is truly uncanny, isn't it? The Alaya Vijnana provides an ancient, sophisticated philosophical model for a generative consciousness that projects a structured, experienceable world. A world that feels real but isn't ultimately independent of the consciousness projecting it. It's a 2,000-year-old interface theory.
Another really crucial and often misunderstood concept from Mahayana Buddhism related to this is sunyata. It's often translated as emptiness. This can be easily misinterpreted, can't it? People hear emptiness and they immediately think it means nihilistic nothingness, like the Buddhists are saying there's no reality at all, it's all just void.
You're absolutely right. It's perhaps the most easily and commonly misunderstood concept in Buddhism, and it absolutely does not mean nihilistic nothingness or that nothing exists. That's a complete misreading. Rather, shunyata, or emptiness, means that all phenomena, everything we can possibly experience or conceive of, from a physical object to a mental state to the concept of self, are empty of svabhava.
Svabhava, what's that?
Svabhava translates roughly as inherent existence, intrinsic nature, self-being, or independent identity. So to say things are empty of svabhava means they lack a separate, independent, intrinsic, self-sustaining nature. Nothing, absolutely nothing, exists in isolation from its own side, purely by virtue of itself.
No, it's about interconnectedness, dependence.
Precisely. Every phenomenon arises interdependently. It co-arises independence upon a vast, intricate web of causes and conditions. This includes the physical components, the preceding causes, the surrounding environment, the concepts we use to define it, and, crucially for our discussion, the consciousness that perceives and conceptualizes it. Nothing stands alone.
So it's not that things don't exist, but that they don't exist independently and intrinsically, separate from everything else, including the mind observing them. Like the Heart Sutra famously says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. How does that line fit in?
Exactly. That famous declaration from the Heart Sutra is key. Form is emptiness, means the world of forms, the phenomena we experience, rupa, isn't ultimately real in the solid, independent way we assume. It's empty of that inherent existence, svabhava. But emptiness as form means this emptiness isn't some separate nihilistic void existing apart from phenomena. The emptiness is the very nature of the forms themselves. They are two inseparable aspects of the same reality. The phenomenal world exists conventionally. It's real in a practical, functional sense. We interact with it. It has consequences. But it is fundamentally empty of the objective, independent, self-sufficient reality we mistakenly project onto it.
Okay.
This provides the perfect ancient philosophical language for the modern scientific and philosophical ideas we've been discussing. It validates Hoffman's claim that the interface is non-veridical, empty of objective truth. It resonates with Bohm's distinction between the explicate order form, which is a manifestation of the implicate order, emptiness, wholeness. The projected world is empty of ultimate standalone reality, but it's full of conventional interdependent reality.
And it's striking that this profound insight isn't just found in Buddhism. You mentioned the Advaita Vedanta school of Hinduism offers a remarkably similar vision. It feels like a kind of cross-cultural confirmation, doesn't it?
It really does feel that way. The Advaita Vedanta school, which was consolidated and brilliantly articulated by the great philosopher Adi Shankara, probably around the 8th century CE, presents a vision that is structurally almost identical, although it uses different terminology derived from the Upanishads and Vedas. The core tenet of Advaita, a word which literally means non-secondness or non-duality, is that the ultimate fundamental reality is a singular, partless, indivisible, non-dual consciousness known as Brahman.
Brahman, the ultimate reality.
Yes. And the individual self, the core of our personal being, known as Atman, is asserted to be, in its true nature, absolutely identical to this universal ultimate consciousness, Brahman. Tat film asi, thou art that.
So my individual consciousness isn't just a small part of the cosmic consciousness. It is fundamentally the same thing. That's an even stronger claim of unity than some other views.
It's the strongest possible claim of non-duality. And in this Advaita framework, the perceived world of multiplicity, the world of separate objects, diverse phenomena, and individual selves, is understood as Maya. Maya is often translated as illusion, but a better understanding might be appearance, delusion, or even magic show. It's conceived as a power inherent in Brahman that creates an appearance, a superimposition, the technical term is vivarta, upon the singular reality of Brahman, making the one appear as the many.
Like projecting a movie onto a blank screen. The screen, Brahman, is real. The movie, Maya, is an appearance playing out on it.
That's a classic analogy they use. The screen remains unaffected by the drama of the movie. Or another famous one is the rope mistaken for a snake in the dark. The rope, Brahman, is the reality. The snake, the world, Maya, is a mistaken perception superimposed upon it. The famous dictum, often considered the summary of Advaita, encapsulates it. Brahma satyam, jagan mithya, jivo brahmaiva napara.
Can you translate that?
Roughly, Brahman is the sole truth, or reality. The world, jagat, is fundamentally an illusion or appearance, mithya, and the individual self, jiva, is nothing other than Brahman. It's an incredibly powerful, consistent, cross-cultural echo of the same fundamental thesis we're exploring. A singular, foundational conscious ground gives rise to an apparent, projected world of multiplicity. This world, while experienced as real in a conventional sense, is not ultimately separate or different from its conscious source.
And it's important to remember these ancient traditions weren't just about spinning abstract philosophical theories. They developed highly sophisticated practical methodologies like various forms of yoga and meditation, specifically designed for individuals to explore and potentially verify these ideas through direct experience. How do those practices fit into this picture?
Indeed, that's a crucial point. These contemplative practices, meditation, mindfulness, self-inquiry, various yogic techniques, are seen within these traditions not merely as religious rituals or relaxation techniques, but as a form of fundamental empirical research. They utilize the instrument of consciousness itself to investigate its own nature and its relationship to reality. They're presented as a kind of technology, a set of techniques for systematically hacking the perceptual interface, our ordinary conditioned way of experiencing ourselves and the world.
Hacking the interface. See what's behind it.
Exactly. The aim is to quiet the usual projections, dismantle the illusions of separateness, like Maya or the constructs of the Alaya, and allow for a direct, unmediated experience of the underlying conscious ground Brahman, or the ultimate nature of mind, Shunyata. It's an experiential path intended to lead to the direct realization or validation of these profound philosophical insights, an experience they refer to with terms like liberation, moksha, or enlightenment, bodhi. They offer a first-person, empirical methodology to engage with these theories, which is quite remarkable and complements the third-person approach of modern science.
Okay, let's try and bring all these incredible converging threads together now. We've got quantum physics, evolutionary biology, neuroscience, ancient philosophy, maybe even hints of new mathematics. In this unified consciousness-first paradigm that the article synthesizes, even our understanding of something as fundamental as the Big Bang has to change, right?
Yeah.
It's no longer seen simply as the origin of matter and energy from some primordial singularity, but
Oh, well,
Right, even the Big Bang gets reinterpreted. It's no longer the ultimate origin point of everything from nothing, but rather it's seen as the boot sequence of the phenomenal space-time interface. It represents the moment that the projection of our specific four-dimensional space-time interface, our XO, began to unfold or differentiate from the timeless, spaceless, undifferentiated conscious ground, which we've been discussing as potentially correlated with the observers, Yo or Brahman or the Alaya. It's the initiation of the cosmic game, the start of the evolutionary process within the interface, the unfolding of the cosmic code into observable phenomenal form. Think of it as the moment the universe powered up its grand simulation or projection for observers like us.
this ties in perfectly with John Wheeler's participatory universe idea, doesn't it? The notion that the universe requires observers not just to be known, but maybe even to come into concrete being and possess a definite history?
Absolutely, the synergy is remarkable. Wheeler's concept, especially his interpretation of delayed choice experiments, implies that the past has no definitive existence except as it is recorded or observed in the present. An unobserved universe, including its own apparent origin like the Big Bang, might exist only as a vast superposition of potentialities, a quantum fuzz. It's the emergence of observers' conscious agents capable of performing measurements, of pulling back information from a fundamental ground that retroactively collapses the wave function of the universe's entire history, giving it a single definite story, including an apparent beginning like the Big Bang. In a profound sense, the cosmos is born, or at least achieves, concrete reality when it's first observed. Our existence isn't just a late-stage accident within the universe, it's somehow integral to its very actualization. It's becoming definite.
Okay, so this new framework also has to radically transform how we view the brain's role, doesn't it? If consciousness is fundamental, the brain can't be the generator of consciousness. So it's not a meat computer somehow creating subjective experience out of objective electrochemical processes. Instead, the article refers to it as a biological transducer. Can you elaborate on that? What does that mean, and how does it connect back to Penrose Hameroff's Orcho theory?
Yes, this is one of the most significant shifts. In this consciousness-first framework, the brain is fundamentally reconceptualized. It's no longer seen as the source or generator of consciousness, the meat computer grinding out subjective experience. Instead, it's understood as a highly evolved, incredibly complex biological transducer.
Transducer, like something that converts one form of energy or information into another.
Precisely. The brain is viewed as a kind of sophisticated receiving antenna, or perhaps a processing filter, tuned to the fundamental reality of consciousness, this universal field or network of conscious agents. Its function is to translate, filter, or pull back information from this universal conscious field and render it into a localized, specific, individual stream of experience, the subjective world you and I perceive. It's like a complex biological radio receiver tuning into a specific broadcast frequency from the cosmic station.
And the specific physical mechanism within the brain that might be doing this transducing, the way it physically pulls that information or tunes into that frequency, that's where Orcho comes in.
Yes, the Orcho theory, developed by Penrose and Hameroff, provides a candidate physical mechanism for how this transduction might occur at the quantum level within the brain. They propose that the most fundamental level of processing relevant to consciousness isn't just the classical firing of neurons across synapses. Instead, they focus on quantum computations occurring within the microtubules, these intricate protein lattices that form the cytoskeleton inside our brain cells, inside neurons.
So quantum effects inside the neuron structure.
Exactly. They argue these microtubules are uniquely structured to be able to support and orchestrate large-scale quantum coherent phenomena, specifically quantum superpositions involving the tubulin proteins that make up the microtubules. Then, according to the theory, When this orchestrated quantum superposition within the microtubules reaches Penrose's objective threshold for self-collapse, that critical point of gravitational self-energy we discussed earlier, an objective reduction or event occurs spontaneously.
The moment of proto-consciousness.
Yes. This OR event, this non-computable, self-organizing collapse occurring within the fundamental geometry of spacetime, as influenced by the brain's quantum state, constitutes, they propose, a discrete moment of conscious experience, or at least proto-conscious experience. Each such orchestrated OR event, or R, is a fundamental occasion of experience, echoing Whitehead's process philosophy.
So putting it together with the GU idea, the brain's orchestrated quantum activity in microtubules is essentially the biological hardware facilitating the geometric pullback of information from the higher dimensional observers, the conscious ground, into our individual 4D reality.
Precisely. That's the grand synthesis suggested. If you combine ORCH or R with the architectural ideas of geometric unity, you get a stunningly elegant, though still speculative, picture. The quantum activity within the brain's microtubules, orchestrated across large parts of the brain, becomes the specific biological process that facilitates the geometric pullback. The orchestrated collapse of space-time geometry occurring within the brain, the ORCH-R event, is the physical act of observation, the measurement event, that pulls information from the higher dimensional observers, or the conscious field, and renders it into a coherent, individualized stream of phenomenal experience within our standard 4D interface. The brain, therefore, is the exquisitely tuned physical device that allows a universal non-local consciousness to be experienced in a localized personal form. It's the unique biological hardware running your individual user instance of the cosmic operating system.
Wow, okay. The article also suggests that the long-sought theory of everything in physics, the TOE, has maybe been too narrowly defined historically, because it typically aims to unify forces and particles, but leaves consciousness completely out of the picture. A true TOE, it argues, must somehow unify the objective world described by physics with the subjective world of experience. How does this consciousness-first model attempt to achieve that?
It achieves it by providing the necessary foundation, the right starting point. A theory that brilliantly unifies the four fundamental forces of nature, but has absolutely nothing to say about the existence or nature of the conscious physicist who formulates and understands that theory is, almost by definition, incomplete. It's missing the experiencer.
Right, it describes the stage, but not the audience or the actors.
Exactly. This consciousness-first model, however, posits a fundamental ontological ground, this unified field of consciousness, perhaps eventually describable by a geometric language like GU, from which both the phenomenal world, the objective appearances, and its physical laws, the rules of the interface, emerge as a stable, projected reality. This framework doesn't just describe the what of physical law, it potentially provides the why. The laws of physics are what they are because they represent the parameters, the operating rules of a stable, consistent interface designed, perhaps, to support the very emergence and evolution of complex observers capable of experiencing it.
So this implies that life isn't just some highly improbable chemical fluke that happened by accident in a fundamentally dead, meaningless universe. And evolution isn't simply a process of blind, random chance churning away.
From this perspective, yes, the cosmos might be imbued with a kind of intrinsic teleology, or at least a directionality, an inherent purpose. Life is perhaps not an accidental chemical side reaction in a meaningless void. Evolution might not be just a blind, random walk through possibility space. Instead, both life and evolution could be seen as expressions of a fundamental cosmic drive towards self-perception or self-realization. As articulated by thinkers like Fagan, Kastrup, and even echoing ancient traditions, the universe evolves living organisms and eventually complex brains capable of sophisticated consciousness as a means for the fundamental conscious ground to know itself, to experience its own potential in manifest form.
The universe looking back at itself through our eyes.
Something like that. The emergence of life, and particularly conscious life, is the universe developing increasingly sophisticated organs of perception and reflection to look back upon itself, thereby achieving a kind of meta-consciousness through its inhabitants. This fulfills the deepest implication of Wheeler's participatory universe. The universe creates observers so that it can, in turn, be fully actualized, collapsing from pure potentiality into a definite experienced reality with a rich history and future. This perspective transforms the cosmos from a cold, sterile, empty expanse into a living, intelligent, meaningful entity engaged in a profound, ongoing process of self-discovery through us.
And this framework, then, could potentially heal that long-standing, often bitter schism between science and spirituality, or science and deep philosophical inquiry. They're no longer seen as opposing forces fighting over territory.
Exactly. They cease to be warring factions vying for ultimate authority on truth. Instead, they are revealed as potentially complementary methodologies, different toolkits, for exploring the same ultimate reality, just from different angles. Science, with its powerful third-person tools of external measurement, mathematical modeling, and experimentation, becomes the ideal method for investigating the structure, dynamics, and rules of the phenomenal interface, the desktop, the icons, Bohm's explicate order. Contemplative traditions and introspective philosophies, on the other hand, with their sophisticated first-person tools of introspection, phenomenological analysis, and meditative inquiry, become the ideal methods for investigating the nature of the conscious ground itself, the reality behind the interface. Bohm's implicate order. Both become valid and necessary paths to knowledge, each revealing different, indispensable facets of a single, unified, conscious whole. So, just stepping back, we've really covered a truly remarkable convergence here today, haven't we? We have quantum physics hinting strongly at an observer-dependent reality. We have evolutionary biology providing a rigorous argument for why our perception would likely be a non-veridical interface. We have these incredibly sophisticated ancient philosophies that meticulously described a mind-only or consciousness-first reality millennia ago. And now, maybe, just maybe, we have the glimmerings of a potential mathematical framework in things like geometric unity that could potentially tie it all together formally. This level of consilience across such diverse fields, it feels like more than just coincidence, doesn't it? It suggests we might be onto something fundamental about the nature of reality.
Yeah, it really does. And this unified model, as presented, it doesn't just try to solve the hard problem of consciousness. It effectively dissolves it. That intractable question of how dead, inert, non-experiencing matter could ever magically give rise to living, breathing, subjective experience, it never even arises as a problem if consciousness is posited as the fundamental reality from the outset, not an emergent property of matter.
Right, the question becomes ill-posed.
Instead, the new easy problem, relatively speaking, becomes, how does the fundamental conscious substrate project or manifest the specific structures, dynamics, and laws of the physical world that we perceive and measure? And that is a question that science, potentially using frameworks like ORTRAR, ITP, and perhaps even GU, seems much better equipped to investigate empirically and mathematically. It completely shifts the entire scientific and philosophical conversation.
Absolutely. And furthermore, this consciousness-first model seems to offer natural, elegant explanations for other deep scientific puzzles that have long plagued physicists and cosmologists. The quantum observer effect, for instance, is no longer some strange anomaly or measurement artifact. It's revealed as potentially the central creative act of the universe, the moment reality gets actualized through conscious interaction. Quantum entanglement, Einstein's spooky action at a distance, is no longer quite so spooky if the entangled particles aren't truly separate objects, but rather correlated manifestations of an underlying undivided conscious wholeness, just as Bohm and Fagan suggested.
In the fine-tuning problem.
Even the apparent fine-tuning of the universe's physical constants, the fact that gravity, electromagnetism, etc., seem perfectly dialed in to allow for stars, planets, and life, which looks like an astonishing coincidence in a materialist framework, finds a natural explanation here. These constants could be seen simply as the necessary parameter settings for a stable, consistent interface capable of supporting the evolution of complex observers needed to actualize the universe. It's all part of the functional design of the cosmic interface.
So this paradigm, if correct, shifts us dramatically. We move away from a potentially bleak picture of a cold, accidental cosmos, where consciousness is just a bizarre and ultimately temporary computational fluke happening inside skulls on one small planet,
towards a potentially much more inspiring vision of a living, intelligent, and truly participatory universe. A cosmos where our own awareness isn't some isolated, insignificant byproduct of grain chemistry, but is a direct and intimate participation in the fundamental nature of reality itself. It's a truly profound shift in our place in the cosmos. Now, it's crucial to emphasize, this grand synthesis, as presented in the article, is still speculative in many of its details, particularly regarding GU and OR. It's a framework under development, but it holds immense explanatory power, internal logical coherence, and a remarkable ability to unify disparate fields. It offers the tantalizing promise of a truly unified theory, one that accounts not just for the cosmos and its laws, but for the undeniable reality of our experience of it, finally bringing the objective and subjective together into a single, coherent picture.
which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, our listener. What does it truly mean for you personally to be a conscious agent within such a reality? If this picture is even remotely accurate, you might be playing an active, perhaps even a foundational role in shaping the very reality you perceive moment by moment. Could your daily moments of conscious experience, every thought, every sensation, every feeling, every observation you make, actually be miniature pullbacks, tiny acts of creation, rendering reality from a vast underlying cosmic observers, making the universe happen in every single breath you take?
That's a staggering thought.
It definitely is, and that's something for you to perhaps mull over, explore, and maybe even investigate through your own experience. Thank you for joining us on this incredible, mind-bending deep dive today. We hope it gave you plenty to think about. Until next time, keep exploring the depths of knowledge.